Hi, I'm Karen Hurden. I'm here with our next edition of Asking for a Friend, and I could not be more excited about today because I have my friend David Burkus, who he's a great business thinker. He has author of 5 books, but this week he has launched a book on leading from anywhere. So, David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me.
We're delighted because we've been having a lot of conversations about the pivot to leading remote teams and how do you create trust and engagement. And what I loved about your book is that it's not about how do we do this for a minute and a half. It's about how do we sustain this and actually take a very deliberate approach to leading remote teams for the long haul. And so that's what we'd like to talk a little bit about today.
Yeah. So, I'm with you. I feel like we were in this debate between when are we going back to the office, and hopefully people have realized that we're not, at least not all at once and not all of the time.
Yeah. So interestingly, one of the things that you start talking about is how it's even more important, and this is important in any team and in any culture, but to really connect to a broader purpose. And some of the words you used as, what are we fighting for? And I just love that. I wondered if you could just unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah. So this question came up working with a lot of different organizations around a sense of purpose or a sense of mission that actually binds people together, that actually makes it clear what the connection between the stated organizational mission or vision is and their day-to-day jobs. And we've known that's important for decades, right? Gallup came out with, I think it was almost 3 decades ago, their famous Q12 scores of engagement. And one of the questions in that is, does the mission or vision of the company make me feel my job is important, right? So presumably, as long as organizations have been working and giving their people those engagement assessments, they've been trying to figure out, right, how do I make the mission and vision of the company affect people's day-to-day lives? And the irony is the engagement numbers haven't moved, right? Mm-hmm. In some cases they've gotten worse, but the last year. But I'm going to blame that on a lot of different factors. Yeah. But it hasn't moved the needle. And I think one of the questions is that there's not that sense of clarity, and there's not that sense of we're really working toward something important, something that will make the world a better place. And so I started cutting through all of that and asking teams or even individuals, when it came to mission and purpose, I would go, I don't care if you know it. Most companies write such a complicated mission statement that I wouldn't be able to memorize it either. But when I asked them the question, hey, when we think about our organization, what are we fighting for? What sacred values are so important we wouldn't compromise on them? Or what change in the industry are we trying to lead? And look, not everybody likes the fight rhetoric. I get that. It just became a question that when I ask it to people, even if the companies never use that sort of crusade or cause or mission, true mission type language, people understand the question, and they have internalized the sense of mission to a level that they see themselves participating in that cause that's bigger than themselves. And so I become sort of a big advocate of that. In fact, I think it's even more important now as we're all working alone together, right, all over the place, that it's going to be really easy for little silos, politics, and turf wars to creep in, not just between departments like it has traditionally done, but between who's back at the office and who's not. Right. Yeah. And if you don't have that strong sense of mission, that we're all in this together, that this is the evil in the world we are trying to remove, or this is the unfairness or injustice in the industry that we're trying to change, or even just this is what our customers or stakeholders are fighting for and how we help them, you're probably lacking a little bit of what I would call a sense of shared identity that's going to keep your work from anywhere workforce together.
Yeah, I so agree with you. It's interesting, when David and I were really getting our company started, one of the things that we talked about is we are fighting against, so we had that word, cynical, dehumanizing leadership. That's what we have to stamp out, And I thought about, when I was reading that chapter, I also thought about a boss that I had one day who said, we're in the fight of our lives. And I was like, what, dude? He was talking about competition. He was talking about us fighting against our major competitor. And I thought, no, I can't get rallied against that. And to your point was, it's not just about fighting against the competition. It's something even bigger than that.
It's almost never about fighting against the competition. I hate, this is a terrible day to talk about it, right? In things of this week and here in America. Yeah. But that's actually my point, right? That people don't the long-term motivations against another person that's in the same organization or same industry and say that specific company is evil, right? Doesn't work. If you're Coke, you're not motivated by the idea that we need to crush Pepsi, right? You might go to work for Pepsi a couple years from now, right? You know that. So there's a difference between that. And when we think about like, okay, we'll get political. When we think about the politicians that inspire and don't cause a ruckus, they're usually still pointing at an injustice, but they're not pointing at a person behind that injustice. They're pointing at some other force that is keeping that injustice in play and saying, here's how we work to remove it. That's the type of fight we're talking about. And that's the type of fight organizations need to be involved in, not this whole like, oh, we're in a battle for market share. Right. I don't know that it's ever motivated anybody except the wrong types of people.
Right. Thank you so much. And Joey, we're glad you're here. Joey, if you have a question for David or anyone else, we're talking about how do you really lead remote teams for the long haul. So any question you may have or a friend may have, we'd love for you to chat it in. And so as we're thinking about that, you and I have a common friend, David. So I noticed you talk about Dr. Amy Edmondson of Harvard, and her work, her pioneering work around psychological safety. And she wrote the foreword to our book. So we're absolutely aligned and really believe in the work that she's done. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about creating trust in remote teams for the long haul, because I think you do a really nice job of getting very practical and specific about that.
Yeah. So there's a really interesting body of research around trust and psychological safety. I mean, fundamentally, and Amy, if she's watching this video, will probably slaughter me for being way too simplistic about what a complicated and hugely important idea. But if you want to know where to get started, fundamentally, psychological safety is a culture marked by mutual trust and respect, right? And the interesting thing about trust is that it is less about being given or earned, which are all the terms that we use, and it's much more about reciprocation, right? It's much more about the fact that, trust is actually, it's a chemical. We feel trusted. When we feel trusted, we have more of the chemical oxytocin, the bonding hormone, or sometimes called the love hormone, but truthfully, it's a social bonding hormone. We have more of that in our bloodstream. And when people invest trust in us, it releases that oxytocin. We're more likely to respond with trustworthy behavior. And so if you're a leader looking to actually build trust in a team, you need to think about it that way. What are the things you can do to demonstrate that you actually already trust your people? This is an interesting conversation, by the way, in this world of work from anywhere, because even back in 2016, I wrote a book called Under New Management that profiled a lot of companies that were seeking to build a culture based on trust and autonomy, and almost all of them turned into a work from anywhere organization, right? They didn't necessarily mean to, but if we mean that we trust our people, that means we trust our people. That means we can give them assignments, let them decide where and how and when they do those assignments. So as a leader, I think it's a little bit of letting go that you have to do. Actually, yeah, I love it. I said that as that was coming up. And you can do it in small things, right? Like I think one of the biggest things you can do is when you're working early with a team and they're looking to you to make a decision, make sure you're demonstrating the rationale behind that decision, not just because here's what it is, but you want to be understood. You want people to understand how you're thinking so that gradually you can actually delegate that decision. Once your team has a great idea of has learned from you what you think and the wisdom that you have to give the rest of the team, you can let them make the decision. And then you end up usually at a very similar decision, but through a sense of trust and a sense of camaraderie that wouldn't have happened if you just snapped to that decision, right? So little things you can do like that. I think that also means not engaging in a uniform standard of checking in with people. You don't need to do a 15-minute Zoom call all Friday, stacked up all on Friday afternoon, and then again on Monday to say, what are you going to work on this week? Everybody manages their workflow a little bit differently, especially in this environment. And the leaders who actually trust their people are the leaders who go through that feeling out process to find out, how can I make sure that you have the autonomy to work however you want? You don't feel like I'm breathing down your neck, but I'm here for you anytime you need help.
Yeah, it's so interesting. About 8 years ago, I was involved in this really experiment of could we have call center agents working from home? And it was so fascinating. The dealing with IT, dealing with the security, dealing with CP&I issues, right? We talked about, should we put cameras in people's offices so we can watch this is a radically different conversation. And now I'm laughing because I watched, our call center clients in 1 week, back in March, move everybody home. There were no cameras there, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing how, in a sense of urgency, how much simpler it got. And guess what? It's working out great.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember a lot of rhetoric in April and May about what software systems should we use to monitor employees, fancy term for spy on them and that sort of stuff. And I just remember thinking, again, through this idea of trust and autonomy, mutual respect, psychological safety, that like if you couldn't send your call center employees home on a week's notice and trust that they would do their job without being monitored, you screwed up a long time ago, right? Something in your hiring process is letting those people in, or something in your policy manuals is demonstrating that we'll be watching you, right? So you messed up a long time ago, and we should probably go back and fix that. And then we can figure out what software to buy to monitor employees, which, by the way, is none of them.
Yeah. It's your experience and what you were writing was reminding me of the conversations I'm having literally every day, which is people are not finding that their employees are not working enough. They're finding that their employees are working too much. I think this as a world, this is the next big problem we're going to have, is that more and more people are going to be burned out, stressed out, and they can't have the boundaries. And what I liked is that you really did give we're all about really practical advice on the show, like really practical ways to do that. Can you share a few of those tips?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing about the office, as soul draining as a lot of offices were, the boundary that they provided actually really helped people, right? So the act of commuting every day helps you flip your mindset from work to home. I mean, part of the reason that we talked about work-life balance is that we really did envision it as these two different spheres of our lives that need to be kept in balance. I mean, it was always sort of a myth, because if one of these two spheres is out of whack, it's going to affect the other one. But I digress, right? And the act of commuting, the act of being somewhere else helped create those boundaries. Remote workers, especially if they were forced into the great work from home experiment, have never had any experience drawing those boundaries. And so everything that we can do as leaders to help people avoid burnout is really about making those distinctions. That's little things, right? So that can be little things like teaching people to set business hours, not the normal 9 to 5, but to actually plan it out in your calendar. When are you going to be working and when are you not, so that you know you're off right now? What rituals are you going to use that replace the commute, right? So like for me, I have 2 devices. And when I leave this room, which is in the basement of our house, when I leave this room, I go upstairs to a charging station and I switch my phone for a tablet. The tablet has nothing work related on it. It's like my personal Facebook account and then Netflix and Kindle and that's it, right? And so I still have the device, and I could walk over to the charging station, but that little bit of friction really, really helps me. And this is something that I think leaders probably need to go first on, so that if they're finding ways to draw these boundaries, they can be helpful for their people. But they also need to recognize when people are out of whack. If you've got an employee that's emailing you at 6:30 a.m. and again at 10:45 p.m., that could be because she's drawn really great boundaries in her life, but it probably isn't. It's probably a signal that you need to talk about it. And one of the best ways you can do that, by the way, is just asking your team, hey, you know what? Let's share calendars. Not share calendars like anybody can put an invitation on, but we've been doing this for months now, and we probably arrived at a rhythm that works for us. It'd be helpful if our team all knew what that rhythm was, so we know who's a night owl and who's an early morning person and that sort of thing.
So Jonathan Green, who is also a friend of mine, says leadership not disconnecting is a real issue. So that I want to turn that into a question. So, what do you do if your leaders are not turning it off? They're not setting boundaries, but they're telling you it's okay to.
Yeah. So this is a huge problem that predates the great work from home experiment, right? The idea that we care about work-life balance and you being off work, but we're also sending you emails at 11:30 at night, right? And this is something that really needed to stop kind of a long time ago. I think now the best thing you can do is, first you've got to commit to disconnecting. If you say that our work hours are this, or you say that our times where we're email, or that this is actually the big one for a lot of leaders. If you say that 24 hours is a reasonable amount of time to wait for an email, then you have to wait 24 hours, right? So it starts with you, and it starts with drawing those up. The irony, of course, is that leaders are the most burnt out by this whole thing that we've been running through. So they're the biggest incentive to be the ones drawing up those boundaries. And then when you have those boundaries, be showy about those boundaries, right? You don't need to apologize if someone sends you an email at 6 p.m. and you don't reply till 6:30, right? You don't have to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just seeing this now. Of course you're just seeing this now because you turned off that device at 5 o'clock, right? So I think those little things go a long way. I think the problem is, like you said about challenges with IT before, one of the big problems is this is a senior leadership, an IT level issue, but it's also a team issue. And so if you can't get senior leadership to go, yeah, we probably should turn off the email servers at some point at night and turn them back on at 8 a.m., then you as a leader need to have that discussion with your team to go, okay, what are the standards we're committing to inside of this team? And then hold yourself accountable to them first and let other people, I don't want to say fall in line, but follow your lead.
So, interesting. David Dye says, are rituals that replace the commute such a helpful process? In your book, you talk about a specific example. I can't remember who the guy was, but he had a mantra that he said.
Yeah, so it was Cal Newport, the author of Deep Work, has this post-work ritual. So I talk in the book about the importance of after-work rituals, right? A lot of us, our beginning work ritual is, okay, well, the kids are set up at school, so now I can go, right? And I don't know that that's a good ritual, but it's less important than the after-work ritual, which is the sign that it's done and anything else that comes up can wait for tomorrow. And so what Cal does is at the end of his work day, which is usually around the same time every single day, he goes over his to-do list, he goes over his calendar, and he makes sure that everything that's on the to-do list has a time on the calendar tomorrow or in the next week, etc. And then as he's shutting down his computer, he closes his eyes and he says, schedule shutdown complete, which he was a computer science person, right? And mathematics person. So I would assume this is something to do with old school, like MS-DOS coding, where you had to physically type in to tell the computer to shut down, right? But it works mentally too, right? Because what he says is that after he does that extremely weird, odd mantra, what happens is throughout the rest of the night, things pop into his head. But he reminds himself that I already went over my task. Like I said the mantra, and I wouldn't have said the mantra if I hadn't gone over my task list and I hadn't made sure that everything has a time on the calendar. Therefore, I can let this thought just sort of dissipate and trust that I can pick it back up tomorrow, which is what that after work ritual is really about, signaling to yourself that it can wait for tomorrow. I mean, if you haven't figured out, by the way, there is always one more email to respond to. There is always one more little task to do. And so the only way you really keep burnout at bay, the only way you really banish burnout is to be comfortable with the idea that I'm done for today and I'm just going to let everything else sit because it's not that important anyway.
Yeah. Great. Rob, thank you so much for saying hashtag be showy about, right? Be showy about boundaries. I love that. Like, so that's real because people are watching you. People are watching your behavior. Joey says, what do you think? Why do you think leadership struggles with trusting the team they hire and equip? Is it a lack of training, a lack of technology, maybe a disconnect between these two?
Yeah, so I think there's two things at play, and one is a more systemic issue than the other, right? So the first thing at play, the really systemic one, is what I often call policy creep, which is we had one employee who totally acted unreasonable and decided to book his overnight stay at the Ritz-Carlton, and it cost $600 a night. And so now we have to define a dollar amount for every hotel stay per night in the expense report, right? Or anytime somebody acts untrustworthy, we create a policy to keep that from ever happening again. I mean, we dismiss the person for sure, and that probably should have been the end of it, right? Because the other 99 people in your firm of 100 can be trusted. So we don't necessarily need that policy creep. And we don't think about the fact that over time, all of those things signal a lack of trust, right? There may be reasons to put processes and things like that into policies. But when you're getting to the point that like, oh, I actually have to stay at the Motel 6 because even the Fairfield Inn is $135 tonight instead of the limit of $129, like that doesn't help people feel trusted. So policy creep is the big one. I think the second one is that we often promote a lot of people who are great individual contributors, and we promote them in and give them a lack of training around delegation and around the big struggle for first-time leaders, which is you could absolutely do something faster yourself. You were promoted because you were so productive. And so when people come in, it's so easy to go, all right, well, I'll just do it, all right? Or I'll tell you exactly how I do it. Both of those things signal that lack of trust in the other person, right? So whether that's training in how to coach people towards learning that same process that you learned it on their own, or whether that's dealing with that frustration that, yeah, I could totally do this faster, or you could do it faster if you just do it the way I do. And realizing that in the long term, that's not actually as valuable a strategy as letting people find the path and feel trusted and feel like they have autonomy along the way. So those are kind of the two big. One is a big systemic issue, and the other is really about becoming comfortable with the idea that maybe that person you delegated the task to is only going to do it 85% as well as you did it, but that's okay because you should be thinking about higher level issues anyway.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to shift gears to my favorite part of your book, because this is a area, this concept of, in remote work environment, synchronous communication, asynchronous communication. And I'm going to share with you my favorite sentence from your book.
Okay.
So you say, asking employees to keep a group chat open is like demanding they attend an all-day meeting with no agenda, where participants come in and out at random and speak only in sentence fragments as you're asking them to commit to the work that they're doing. Right?
Yeah. What could go wrong?
My husband and business partner, David, is on the line, and I know he's laughing because at one point I just like shut down Slack and I'm like, I am done, because when you're trying to concentrate and do really strategic work and you have bing, 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 bing all day long, it's a problem. So tell us but you have really like being deliberate about what are you doing asynchronously and what are you doing synchronously?
Yeah. So this is a question. Communication around remote teams is a question I get all of the time. And probably the reason that I get that question all the time is there's no one good answer, right? I spoke even in 2016 about firms that were having success banning internal email, because internal email, like your inbox is a terrible to-do list. It really is, right?
Mm-hmm.
People were using it that way. And so the realization that I've had over the last 4 years of having these tools conversations is that we can't pick the right tool until we have a deeper conversation that communication is not one problem, it's two problems. It's the what are we going to do synchronously, meaning how are our meetings going to run? How are our face-to-face one-on-one chats going to run, or even phone calls, which we really need to rediscover, but that's a whole other diatribe. And then asynchronous communication. The problem is that a lot of us choose tools that were actually designed for asynchronous communication and then have expectations that it's synchronous, whether that's expecting an email reply in the next hour or feeling like you always have to be in that Slack channel because if you're not, you might miss something. And the tools are getting a little better than this, like threaded discussions in Slack actually make it a totally different tool than when it was like trying to do a business meeting in a Chuck E. Cheese before that, right? But the point is, we can't pick the right tool until we break out of that and have that conversation. What are the subjects and the issues and the types of communication we need to commit to as being asynchronous? Project updates, requests for help, all of those sort of things can usually be asynchronous. And then what are the things and the subjects and the times that we want to have synchronous communication? Once we settle that, then we can think about what the tool for talking about those specific issues is, right? It's usually not Slack, by the way. It's usually a project management software if you've committed to the idea that this is asynchronous communication.
Mm-hmm. And, then there was sort of the opposite side of this where you say, but people still need a virtual water cooler or a place to hang out. And I think that's one of the conversations we've been having a lot with our clients is, how do you create that, but also make that be a voluntary place that people can go? I've had somebody say, I don't really think it's right to require me to come to the happy hour, the virtual happy hour, right? So
yeah, there's a lot of people with hangovers from their Zoom happy hours. I'm just going to be honest. Yeah. I totally follow you. I think that the tool, the Slack is a great tool, or WhatsApp or whatever sort of chat tool you want to use.
Yep.
The key is it should be for chat. It should be the virtual water cooler. In other words, you should commit that we don't have work-related conversations in here. We could have work-related conversations in the sense that teeny bit of praise, right? The attaboys or attagirls, those sort of things, but a deep request for help, or can someone help me find this resource on the company intranet or something like that? That shouldn't be going on in that channel. That should be going on in something that's threaded, that's saved, that's much more asynchronous. And so, like you said, the goal should be to build a place where everyone feels welcome, but no one feels obligated. And I think the only way you do that, or at least the only way I've seen teams that thrive do that, is to say, this is our water cooler. We don't have work-related discussions here. And when someone does, we say, oh, that's great. Could you put that in the Trello? Or could you put that in Basecamp or whatever tool we're using for that asynchronous, more keeping coordinated tool, that's where we put that. And then we go back to sharing pictures of our kids and talking about what we did on the weekend.
Oh, I like that. Just being really clear. And if somebody is misusing the norm of the channel, just to gently redirect that. I think that's really good. So I'm going to open up, see if anyone else has another question. And while I do that, anybody have a question or a question for a friend? I do want to talk a little bit about creativity, because I know you are a creativity expert. And as I was resonating with some of your approaches to innovation, and it was really aligned with the work that we've been doing around courage and innovation. And you talk about how it's better to, instead of having these big brainstorming sessions, to divide your meetings into smaller chunks, which is exactly what we've been encouraging people to do. Defining the problem, and now you're talking about idea generation, and now you're talking about making decisions and being clear which phase of creativity you're in. And just love to have you riff on that a little bit.
Yeah, one of the big questions that I get a lot of times is can you brainstorm on a Zoom call? And no, you probably can't do it as well as you could in person. But we've also really screwed up the process of problem solving in person a long time ago too, which is exactly what you said. I mean, the normal thing, a team assumes it knows what the problem is, jumps into a meeting room, somebody grabs a whiteboard marker, and then we just go to town generating ideas, instead of taking the time before that meeting to really make sure we're solving the right problem, that we're asking the right question. We don't actually want people to think outside the box. We want to define the box that the answer has to fit inside first. And then we want people thinking as broadly as they can, only because it serves the goal of finding ideas that fit inside that box. And then we need to make a decision, and we actually need to choose one. And it's usually not, let's just circle one. It's usually, let's talk about how these 2 or 3 ideas can fit together in a comprehensive program. And the interesting thing is those are different stages, but you also want different people in those different meetings. And so that becomes a big problem as well. And I think this is the opportunity where virtual can actually do this better, because it's easier to move into those multiple stages when you're virtual.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we're winding down here. So, David, I would love to hear any last thoughts, or if you could give someone just the most practical piece of advice that you have around leading remote teams for the long haul, what would that be?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you probably that gets overlooked is there were a lot of small, organic, little conversations and little bonding events that happened. And I think you should probably start thinking about, this is a long-term thing. The future of work is working from anywhere. And so the future of leadership is leading from anywhere. And so in the long term, you need to think about, what are we going to do on a small scale to kind of replicate that? I love ideas like opening the Zoom call for the weekly team meeting a couple minutes early, leaving it open a couple minutes late so people can chat. It may also be developing rituals. It's probably not the Zoom hangover, but it might be a once a month shared meal. A lot of teams haven't been deliberate about how they're going to build bonds when everyone can't get together. And by the way, when it's safe to do so, you want to be thinking about getting together in person. But until then, be deliberate about that, because those bonds are really going to serve you and really going to help your team figure out how to make requests for help, how to give feedback to each other, all of the things that really leverage the group mind. Start with making sure the group is bonded.
So agree with that. And that is what you reminded me of. One thing I did want to talk about that we definitely did not yet. And that is just briefly the importance of, when we were in person, we had offsite meetings, and now as more people go fully remote, the importance of having on-site meetings and scheduling that and investing that and taking some of your, and if you've had a real estate savings, are you building into your budget to allow time for that? So David, I want to just thank you so very much. This is a topic that is so near and dear to all of our hearts. And you've written a very practical book, Leading from Anywhere. And we're just delighted to have you as our guest today.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me. It was a great chat.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. And in a couple of weeks coming up here, we have a really neat group of HR leaders. So I'll leave a teaser for that and talking about how to really get your most investment from your training. So thank you, and looking forward to talking with you next time on Asking for a Friend.